I don't love books about cannibalism. I love books about food, and books about cannibalism just kind of happen to fall into that category. This is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. It was published in February of this year. It is a book largely about cannibalism. I just read it, and now we're going to talk about it, spoiler free. I picked up this book without knowing anything about it. I was just browsing in a bookstore and I saw a display set up for this new release. And the display was this set table, red checkered tablecloth, plates all laid out, stacks of books, and also images of raw meat, kind of in cutouts around the table. And that presentation of violence and domesticity together is what really drew me in. I picked up the book, I read the description, I saw that it was about cannibalism, but also about hospitality. And so I bought it. I read it in one sitting. It took me about maybe 4 hours to get through this. I raced through it, especially as I got closer to the end. And I have thoughts, and I would like to talk about them with you. So let's talk about what The Lamb is about. We get this novel through the perspective of Margot, who is around 11 years old, and she lives with her mother in this sort of run-down homestead in a remote area of England where the landscape is very bleak and beautiful, but very rugged and treacherous. There are all these local legends about the earth just swallowing people up. Margot has kind of dim memories of her father being present in her earlier childhood, but for as long back as she can fully remember, it's just been her and her mother, Mama. And Margot and Mama's diets have always been based on cannibalism. Their house kind of stands alone in the woods. Like I said, it's a very remote area. And so they wait for lost hikers or for people with car trouble to knock on their door, people who they call strays, who don't seem very rooted in the world, who maybe wouldn't be noticed if they went missing right away. They invite those people into their home in the premise of offering them shelter and aid. And then they dose them with hemlock and they slaughter them and they eat them. That is their status quo. That's the way that their life has gone for as long as Margot can remember. But the disrupting event in the story happens when a woman named Eden comes to their door, who seems just like all the other strays, but for some reason there's something about her that resonates with Mama. And so instead of turning her into a meal, Margot's mother incorporates her into their home and into their family. And throughout the narrative, we see Margot start to think more and more about what it actually means for them to live their lives the way they do. She's getting older, she's starting to pass out of childhood. And for the first time, she's starting to think differently about herself and her mother and the wider world. And Eden's presence in their home is shifting everything, especially the relationship that Margot and her mother have to each other. Like I said, I picked up this book without really knowing anything about it. I hadn't read any reviews of it. I hadn't seen anyone online recommending it or talking about it. I didn't have any preformed ideas about what this book was going to be like or what it was going to be about. But I did still form my little first impressions expectations from just reading the inside front cover. And there were a couple things as I read through this that surprised me or that went against those expectations that I had formed off the bat. The dust jacket, which is lovely, but which I have removed for the superficial aesthetic reasons of this video, describes this as, quote, a folk tale, a horror story, a love story, an enchantment. And I definitely read that and formed an expectation that that element of a folk tale and an enchantment would be more pronounced throughout than it ended up being. I was expecting kind of fairy tale vibes, not in a Disney way, in like a Hans Christian Andersen way. And the conclusion of the book did bring that folktale element to the forefront in a way that I really loved, really just in the final few pages, but it wasn't very present throughout to me. I also wasn't expecting while reading this how much this was going to be a book about just this lonely, neglected child in a way that feels surprisingly real for a folktale vibe novel about cannibalism. In several scenes throughout the novel, we follow Margot to school and we see how ostracized she is and how lonely and how much she struggles to be a part of the world around her. She's poor, she's weird, she has this complicated, scary, secret family life that she has to keep hidden from kids her age and from the adults around her. And in the days since I have finished this book, as I've been kind of reflecting back on it, that is the thing that keeps on sticking with me the most, is just that sad, lonely element of Margot's childhood more than the creepy horror part of the cannibalism that causes her isolation. There is definitely a degree of innocence to the narrative voice. You know, Margot's perspective is limited as a result of her being a child. She has just a lack of context and experience with some of the things that are surrounding her. But it didn't feel like an author forcing an air of innocence. You know, it wasn't an affectation of childishness. The narration, I think, was just very effective. Margot was a well-drawn character. I cared about her. I was rooting for her, especially in the final quarter of the book as her situation is getting more vulnerable and more dangerous. I was in it with her, you know, I was racing through those final pages of the book. I wanted to see how things resolved for her. So those are some of my general impressions, but let's get into the meat of the matter. See, they gave me this little meat pin because human meat. Let's talk about cannibalism, because this book has a lot of cannibalism in it. Literally from the first page to the last page, this is a book about people eating people, and like a lot of people. Like if we were to think logistically about the sheer number of people who are going missing in these woods because mama is killing them and eating them, it would strain believability. We would have to believe that this woman is the most prolific serial killer of all time, perhaps, and that the police there, well, that there are no police there, that truly nobody gives a shit about the hundreds of people who have gone missing near this creepy woman's house, you know? I do think that the folktale vibe does some work in removing the impulse to question that element of things. That just isn't how this book is asking us to think about cannibalism. It's an interesting blend, or kind of like balancing act, because the book is forcing you to confront the fleshy realities of cannibalism on a scale of 1 to 10, the gross factor, with 1 being nothing and 10 being I'm sick to my stomach. I would place this at like a 5. I have a weak stomach. I get grossed out easily. There were a couple pages in this every now and then where I was like, ew, I wish I hadn't read that. But it's not like gratuitous. But it does describe some moments of processing the body that is to be consumed. This does not flinch away from the acts of cannibalism. It doesn't take cannibalism and abstract it for you so that you can focus just on the metaphor and the concept. The cannibalism is really happening. You have to think about the cuts of meat on the table and the extinguishing of human life and all of that. But the book is also leaning pretty heavily on the metaphor of cannibalism and the significance of the mother's hunger. Margot does eat people. You know, she's a kid. She eats what is put in front of her on the dinner table. But it is her mother who really is the cannibal, and it's her mother's hunger and desires that we really look at most. There are several ways that I'm used to seeing cannibalism in literature, and this book takes a few of them all at once and kind of puts them together in Mama as a character. There's the idea of cannibalism as a way to delineate otherness and draw these distinctions between human and subhuman, right? Cannibalism is one of the ultimate taboos. For one person to eat another person is abjectly horrifying. So either the cannibal needs to be inhuman, or the person who is eating a human body needs to be able to see that person as less than human. And the latter is the case for this book. Mama categorizes her prey as strays. She sees them as less human than her, as less real than her. We also see often in literature that cannibalism can be used as a way to express extreme sexual hunger for another person. And that, again, factors into how Mama is doing cannibalism in this book. There's an element of seduction to the way she brings them into her home and she comforts them and entertains them before dispatching them. You know, it's sex, or at least sensuality, as foreplay to cannibalism in a way. And then there's the idea of cannibalism as an extreme form of intimacy, of collapsing the borders between your body and another person's body, taking them within you. That idea becomes especially pronounced as the book goes on. This idea that once you consume someone, they are forever a part of you, almost that they live inside of you. One of the things that the presentation of cannibalism in this book in particular was really making me think about is how in a lot of the contemporary narratives featuring cannibalism that I'm familiar with, there is specific focus on the cannibalistic hunger of women. And there's just a lot to think about there. You could get into the idea of how women are the group that most commonly experiences pregnancy and most often participates as the receiver in penetrative sex, and what it means to compare those experiences of having another person's body inside of you in connection with cannibalism. That might be a little too Freudian or something to bear out under any detailed discussion, but it's there. But like I've said, the active cannibal in this book is the character of the mother, and the book spends quite a bit of time digging into this woman's very fraught relationship with motherhood and her sexual relationships and this overwhelming, uncontrollable hunger that she has for other people's bodies. A narrative about cannibalism forces you to think about bodies in a different way than you normally do. For one thing, the fact that the body can be reduced to meat. Narratives about cannibalism often force you to think about your physical self as something separate from your mental, emotional self, who you are as a person and who you are as an animal body. A book that engages with cannibalism in the way that this one does presents violence, horror, transgression, desperation, but imbues that with a degree of emotional intensity and desire for human connection that is uncomfortable and gross and horrifying and relatable. Not that women want to eat people, but it makes sense to me that women connect with the ways that cannibalism narratives highlight the pleasures and horrors and hungers and violences of just being in a body. Maybe because in a lot of ways, the female body is often chewed up and spat out by the world, and it feels good to flip the script on that. Maybe there's just satisfaction in being able to think about bodies as being carnal and gross and animal when women's bodies are often expected to be clean and beautiful and ornamental. I'm not saying that cannibalism is empowering. I'm not saying that the cannibal mother in this book is a girl boss or a feminist folk hero. I just think it's interesting that stories and discussions about cannibalism speak to women demonstrably. My video about cannibalism in early modern English drama, it's sitting at around 126,000 views right now. 90% of those views are from women. And admittedly, most of my audience is women. 80% of my audience is women. This is by no means a no boys allowed space. Boys are allowed. They're just not the demographic that vibe with me the most. This is mostly a space where girls like to hang out for whatever reason. But when I talk about cannibalism, the girls show up more than ever. I think it's not a coincidence that so many books like this one are by, for, and about women. Women have an appetite for cannibalism content. Make of that what you will. Like I said at the top of this video, and I've talked about elsewhere, I kind of just accidentally ended up reading a bunch about cannibalism. It's not something that I actively seek out. What really drew me into this book was my curiosity about how hospitality was going to factor in to the element of cannibalism, given that this is a book about women who exclusively eat guests in their home. And that didn't end up being very present. It was there, you know, Mama has this idea that her strays are more delicious if they've been happier in their final moments. So she takes them in as guests, she wines and dines them, she entertains them. So there is an element of kind of treacherous hospitality of the host-guest relationship being betrayed in one of the most ultimate ways that you can do that, by feeding them dinner and then making them dinner. You know, you make them dinner and then you make them dinner. There just wasn't a lot of time spent in the novel getting into that, and that's fine. That's not a failure of the novel. It's just a direction that the author didn't choose to go in that I thought that they might. They didn't. That's fine. Not every book is written exclusively for me. Most of the cannibalism literature I have read is from the 1500s and 1600s. This is, I think, only the third contemporary fiction cannibalism book that I have read. It's this one, Tender is the Flesh, and A Certain Hunger. And right now, if I had to rank them, I would put this smack in the middle, with Tender is the Flesh in last place and A Certain Hunger in first place. Possibly the only reason A Certain Hunger comes in first place is because there was no eating of fingers in that one. And in both The Lamb and Tender is the Flesh, there's eating of fingers, and I don't enjoy being asked to think about the eating of fingers. And I guess now I'm doing it to you, because now you have to think about nibbling on the little fingers. I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary. I don't like it. Now, if the girls are interested, I could do a video going more in depth into these three cannibalism books with spoilers included, talking about them more comprehensively and about how cannibalism factors in a way that doesn't avoid details about the ending. I usually avoid giving spoilers when I'm talking about books that aren't 400 years old. This one, for example, is very fresh out in the world. I really enjoyed how the ending unfolded. I was in a bit of suspense. I wouldn't want to take that away from anyone else, so I keep it spoiler free, but there is a lot more I could say about cannibalism in this book if I took the ending into account. For now, I will just say that this was absolutely the right book for a rainy, cozy evening spent inside, curled up on the couch, reading while the room grows gradually dark around me. So next time you are thinking of having one of those nights, you might consider this book for the occasion.